Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and doctors, today we're going to be talking about, well, how to consider a sane way of growing the practice as you're adding locations and selling practices. So we're going to talk about divestiture as well as mergers. And I'm not going to do this as a step-by-step kind of a thing. I'm Scott McDonald, owner of DrDemographics.com, and I frankly love what I do, and I love the doctors we work with. I want to give you free information, and that is kind of a thing that we do. If you want services, heck, you can pay for those things later. But let's just give you a bunch of stuff to think about and some facts to chew on. This morning, after the recent election in New Jersey and Virginia, lots of things have happened. Now, I bring it up because our idea is to try to find the perfect place to put a practice. There are some places that have become extremely difficult to go into. And I'm talking about primarily because of the jurisdictions of state governments. It has been hard to go to New York State, for example, or California, and want to set up a de novo practice. And it's even difficult to acquire existing practices. But I also want to tell you something we're going to talk a little bit about today, and that's selling a practice or divestiture. There are darn good reasons to break up the act. I mean, hey, you just asked the Beatles and yeah, well, Yoko Ono is the one who got the blame for that, right? Well, I'm sure none of you are old enough to remember that, but I am. And the same thing is true when it comes to how you're handling the growing issues and division issues regarding practice locations and sites. So I want to be very specific about what's working and what's not. And I'm not going to talk much about the election that recently happened, except it tends to change the calculus on places that are acceptable to go to because public policies are changing as administrations and legislatures and as state officers go through changes as well. Right now, and I'll make California the example. California has been particularly difficult. It has about 15% of the population of the United States and a larger percentage of healthcare practices than the rest of the country. But it is very expensive to make these moves, and therefore the risks are higher here than in other sites. As you are likely aware, we only take about a half an hour to do this. There's a short version that I also list. It's only about 5 minutes long. And that just gets some of the high points. The idea is to try to make things easier for you. So we're talking mergers, acquisitions for healthcare practices. And I don't want to handle this from a business management point of view. I want to look at it from a demographic and marketing point of view, because there are issues that are separate from the simply combining the inventory and you know, how businesses are run, so to speak. Now, ultimately, Dr. Demographics is in the where business. We talk about the issues regarding what you most want to know about your location, how to take advantage of it, how to promote it, and to keep ahead of the trends that are happening. Look, I'm trying to make this podcast, this webinar, really relevant, and I'm trying to handle tomorrow's trends today. And those trends change. Now, things are happening right now. Maybe you felt them, but maybe you haven't. Are you seeing it? Now, if you look around the professional community, your medical and dental societies, you visit people, you kind of chat with your vendors. You want to talk to the salespeople too, because they're great sources of information. You want to talk to the brokers and find out what's happening from their perspective. And what almost all of them are going to tell you is different things. But that doesn't mean there aren't some salient trends that I think you ought to be aware of. Practice purchase, acquisitions, divestiture, sales, and mergers are going on at a higher rate than ever before. And this is what's happening in the post-pandemic world. A lot of people have said, look, I don't want to get stuck in this office or this practice, which I see as a dead end forever. I want to get some money and capitalize on what I've done. Many people are saying, I would love to purchase an existing practice, but dang, what I'm seeing on the market is, well, not very healthy, and it's very, very expensive. So a lot of people are taking the de novo practice idea. How do you do a startup and where do you go? But how do you determine the risk for when you're seeing a new practice that is in your area that you want to acquire, and how do you make that decision? I'm only handling it from the demographic perspective, not, what kind of forms do you need, how your taxes should be structured. Nah, it's not me. Now, I'm not a broker. Demographics, however, are part of the formula to avoid mistakes and make wise decisions. So, in other words, if you know what's coming up on the pike, if you understand what the key pitfalls are going to be for what you're doing in considering mergers and acquisitions and even divestiture, you're going to be in a much better position. But remember, I do not make my money as many brokers do, and I'm not blaming them. That's a good profession, and so many are excellent at what they do. But I'm just going to say, if it isn't going to work, that's not my concern because I don't get paid if it doesn't. My job is to keep you happy and have everybody keep coming back to Dr. Demographics and having everybody say, yeah, I learned a lot, and I now have the facts behind what's a good idea and what's not. Now, it may sound reasonable when agreements are being discussed in principle. So if you happen to have a dinner with another doctor in your area, you're having lunch and you're thinking, hey, what if we were to do this? Well, I can understand that's a wise thing. And on paper, it may look spectacular. The problem is things will tend to fall apart unless you get a lot of really close examination and get the numbers in front of you. Part of what I do is I talk about the numbers. As an example, is the area growing? Is it shrinking? Is the demographic character of the practice area that you're in shifting? In fact, a lot of people in Southern California have said what's really weird is places that we used to assume were growing and thriving and healthy are not. And in other states, places that you kind of considered were sort of a dead end. And I'm really talking to you, Arizona, lots of places south of Maricopa County and near Pima County used to be just awful, but things have changed. And so they deserve a second look. So you can't just sit on what your assumptions have been previously. This is also true in most parts of Texas and Florida. But I'm seeing things in North and South Carolina and Georgia that are really kind of remarkable in how they're shifting. With this recent election, I think you're going to see some big things happen in Northern and Western Virginia that you hadn't seen before. And this is going to happen really, really quickly. Now, brokers can be a little over optimistic when it comes to doing a deal. That's because doing a deal is how they make a living. Now, you want to make the deal, I understand that, but a little research is going to save you over time. Now, one of the big problems when we first start talking about this is what is the practice area and how is it defined? I say it because a lot of people say, well, look, I want to do a new office. I want to keep my existing practice, but how far away should I go? Also, what population am I likely to draw from in this other area? And are they going to be profitable or not? You already know, you're smart people, that the demographics of the location are going to be more than just the competition ratio. I mean, I get all that. I understand that a lot of competition is not a good idea. However, a lot of times there are mitigating factors that make a population that is large and growing, but there's a lot of competition, more desirable, not less. So trust me on this one. You want to know how you define the practice area and then make an analysis based on where those people lie. So I don't want to say 2 or 3 miles from a site is good or bad, because the population density will determine whether it is good or bad, and the demographic characteristics of the place. Don't get all freaked out by how large an area it is. There are some places that are within half an hour's distance traveling from another location that is actually in competition with that site. In other locations, that distance may be 7 minutes travel time. Don't get caught up in that simple definition. Units of measurement are relevant to your situation, maybe. Now, like I said, I prefer using drive time because it is a standardized measurement to determine how likely are people to come from one site to another. If it is too far away, people will not make the transition, even if there are no other providers in that area. I can promise you there will be in a short time if there is sufficient base for the population to grow. I hope I haven't lost anybody. So just get in the idea that drive time is my preference, what we refer to as an isochrone. Yeah, I can always do that in miles. Just recognize that if you have a freeway or a mountain or a large shopping center, it'll completely mess up what your calculations are going to be. A demographic report is in your software. Now, what I'm saying is almost all medical and dental database software has a thing that you can call up a pre-prepared demographic report. What it does is it takes your patients, the head of household usually, and it will say how many people live within that zip code. If you were to use the zip code data that comes out of your own software, you'd be able to determine a lot about how large your current practice area is or what you want. I'm saying if you're an 84103 is your primary zip code that you're drawing from, I mean, that's great. But it doesn't necessarily describe where people are coming from. But most importantly, it doesn't tell you about their demographics as a household and the desirability of the population for your practice. So your demographic report will take the geography, but it may also take an age and also insurance type. Now, rarely is it going to talk about how much money they make. Most demographic reports don't take that kind of data into account, but their geography certainly is, and certainly also their age. Some types of practices have to be concerned about gender differences because some practices are dealing much more heavily in one gender than another. And please, let's not get into the political correct thing, okay? I'll just say in the world of demography, there's a difference between men and women physiologically, and that's going to affect about how they receive treatment. I'll keep going on. Now, how can we determine the best next location that will work relative to your current sites and do that objectively? Now, you probably know that if you want to grow your DSO, your MSO, your practice, and add other locations, you've got to know where to go next. We can always provide an objective analysis of where those other locations might be found relative to your current site, and will take into account not only drive time, but also transportation arteries. How much traffic is flowing along the streets that are going to and from your current and your proposed sites? So in that way, you can be rational and explain why it makes sense to put in $1 million building or a $50,000 building, or to lease a property for 5 years, or should you look at 10? You see, the next locations are a manifestation of demography. It's not just an opportunity that Joe Blow is selling his practice and I should buy it or not. You've got to know, is this rational for your current locations or relative to your current sites? Practices are more than random zip codes or population clusters, however. They are, if you look at the numbers on zip codes, they almost never have the same population, and they certainly don't have the same growth nor income figures. That's why dealing with a demographer who can break that data out according to zip codes means your next places to go or the best places to divest or sell just makes sense. So look, practices are not distributed randomly necessarily, and there is a rational explanation as to why some places ought to be on the chopping block and why others might not. And it isn't just profitability, it's the potential for profitability. Now, there are lots of common errors that people make in gaining new practice sites and divesting them and bumping up how much you're putting into the office and how much you may want to draw down. In some locations, you may have too much staff. All right, let's face it, staff is beyond a doubt the most expensive factor that you have within most practice locations. So I'll just say there's got to be a rational way to look at that. Now, if you want to purchase an existing practice, there's a whole calculus to determine whether it's going to be a good idea or not. Is this going to be a lot of money or a little? I will always tell you, I've never met a doctor who thought, this isn't that much. Existing practices, if they're still alive, are usually going to be a good investment, usually, but not always, and certainly not as good in one area as it is in another. So you've got to have the factors to determine whether or not this is an error in going there. Now, it happens all the time, and I should have mentioned MSOs, but DSOs are particularly, this is true. They will say, we need to buy this other practice, and it's going to be a great idea for us. And I always come back and say, well, what makes you think this area, forget the practice itself, is a good idea? If the population is decreasing, if it is economically stressed, if the employment rate is falling, if the how many people are working in an area is not consistent, you got problems, or at least warning signs, or they could be indications of really great things that are happening. That's why I let the numbers be your guide. So is it a good idea to have a competing practice near another office? And that gets to the whole idea of poaching. Is it going to poach on your current patient base? Well, that takes demographic help. It is not a management function. There's no way for you to know. I happen to have that because we're looking at the isochrones. Where do people come? Where do they go to work? Where do they come home from work? And what are they doing? And which locations are going to show the most promise? Now, divesting an existing practice, an office, is risky. And a lot of people are saying, well, I just want to get rid of it. And what they're really saying is, I'm tired of working in there, but they could be setting up their own biggest competitor when this happens. So if you vacate an office, and maybe you're going to sell the practice to someone else, but if they have a different or better means of making a living at that location, making it more profitable, you've just hurt yourself. Now, maybe it's a good idea to get rid of an existing office. Maybe it's a bad idea. But you see, the demographics are going to tell you whether or not the other office is a good location to do this in or not. There are issues that often happens in mergers and acquisitions that I've got to sensitize you to. And that is combining different practice types and different, sometimes incompatible practice procedures. Now, the obvious one I want to just talk about is pediatric and orthodontic practices. In a way, it makes a lot of sense. Come on, we're dealing with kids. Except a pediatric dental practice and an orthodontic practice are not drawing from the same age groups, nor are they offering equal procedures. One practice may, in theory, draw from the pediatric, and the other may draw from the adolescent market and assume that they're going to feed each other, but they may not. And often it happens that one is going to suck the potential out of the other office. So I'm just saying this can be known and studied. And if you ever wanted Dr. Demographics to help you, there is a standard report we have to be able to say, how desirable is it to go in here with a combined practice, or would it be better to divest the two practice types from each other? This will happen regularly with pediatric and adolescent markets, but it also is true of adult and geriatric practices. Now, there's some people who believe that everybody is a patient. There's no service we can't offer, except the truth is some procedures which you're going to do, some treatments are going to be much more profitable than others. And you can know that based upon, well, you're the doctor. You already obviously know what your tables of income are going to look like. But I can tell you the future because I know what the demographics in the area are looking like, what the trends are. Now, some people want to open a satellite practice. They have the idea that, if I just went in one day a week, this would be fantastic. And, in some places, that is absolutely true. In other places, based upon the trends of the population, it's a dog, not a good idea. So being able to determine a satellite office, and by the way, that's not the same thing as a second office by definition of marketing, you want to know what you're getting into and determine its risk. Investing in de novo practices can be very profitable or really a pain in the neck. They're expensive and they're risky, but sometimes you don't have the option. So getting a read on what's happening in your region might be a wise idea. Now, what can go wrong? According to the Wall Street Journal, 75% of business integrations fail due to market definition error. This is going to be true of almost every healthcare office, but I even say even more so, because doctors are not reasonable people by their nature. And come on, most of you either are doctors or you're working with doctors, and it's true. There are personality situations and practice types that are not easily compatible. And the market definitions of the product, price, place, and promotion may not be the same. So that's why we do this service to help doctors. Market definitions, you have to look at not just how many people there are, which would be the size issue, but you've got to know about growth and the character of the growth. So in other words, if new people are opening up and they're starting to live in new places, is that compatible with the practice type you've got and your current patient base? Maybe, and maybe not. But wouldn't you like to know that before you have to get a loan? There are some people who assume that I have no competition, or they get really freaked out if there are other offices in the area. But in fact, a little demographic and psychographic research will tell you that these people may not be competitors at all. And that's why you get a third party who's objective and cool and calculating, like me. We can actually help you. Now, viability requires two kinds of research. It requires quantitative and qualitative. You can very simply say, all right, are they rich? Are they growing in population? How big is the population? That's simply quantitative. But the qualitative issues deals with other issues that you have got to know. So how well educated are these people? How many years of schooling? What kinds of jobs are they in? Are they white collar professional, gray collar, what some people say service industry, or are they blue collar? And there are high skilled blue collar practices or practices based on that population that do remarkably well. But you see, you have to understand something about the qualitative aspects of the population you wish to serve and to base your population on, your practice. There are issues such as accessibility and visibility that you have got to know. And unfortunately, they cannot easily be quantified. You need somebody who's going to be able to say, given the amount of traffic, how many people drive by the site. And by the way, they determine that as gross rating points or GRPs. Most doctors don't know about GRPs, but we do. And we can tell you, given how much traffic is going to one site to another, why the traffic is flowing as it is, can really help you in making a determination on acquisition or whether to acquire or not to. Covenant restrictions, by the way, are very difficult to enforce in court. In some states, frankly, it doesn't matter at all. But you want to know what the covenant restrictions are and have them measured objectively. Because some people may say, oh, those people come down from Houston all the time. And they may not, just because they're deaf either. So why does it exist? And was it rationally drawn? That's what you want to know. Patient bases are essentially or can be incompatible. I'm just saying this. You put a lot of people in the same reception area, doesn't mean they're all going to get along or like each other. They may, in fact, be repelled from each other. I'm not trying to jinx anything, but I'm just saying examining your patient bases is certainly a good idea. There is a practice culture, and that culture can be ill-defined. It isn't just a matter of what services you offer. It has largely to do with the manner in which you communicate with your patients. Staff issues are the first sign of incompatibility because they're showing a disruption in practice culture. And that's a whole different thing about psychographics we can help with. We've got a report to the practice viability report, and we also offer a variation on the practice viability called a marketing report. In the marketing report, we get into all the psychographic groups your practice is made up of, and we talk about the practice culture. They're both on our website at drdemographics.com. Samples are available. Prices are listed in the drop-down menu. It's always a little different depending on the different kinds of practices. Pediatric endocrinology is not the same as general dentistry. That's all I'm saying. So we want to get into this in a practice viability where you're looking at the demographics, psychographics, detailed competition examinations, if you will, and culture. And so here's the last little thing I'll say. Guys, if you're interested in this stuff, the time to bring in us is before you get the brokers and the lawyers involved. You want to know before it gets too expensive, is this a good idea or not? And the best way to determine whether it's a good idea or not is to run an objective report where you can get the data and proper analysis from people who are experts in the field. That's how we can save your bacon. Now, honestly, I think the best thing we do sometimes is to tell people, hey, you've got to be cautious because of X, Y, and Z. I think that's a good use of our time and attention. If you want more information, write to me at info@drdemographics.com. We have all of our services listed. We have these podcasts, and I want to thank you so much for watching. Please take care.